The Recruitment Smart Podcast. Thank you for coming back again. I'm delighted with our guest today. The guest of the show is none other than Bill Fisher. Bill I've known for well over a decade, probably 15 years, back to the early days of developing data products in things like Twitter job search and the social CV that became Dice Open Web. The first person to really show me the power of data and what could be done is now a colleague of mine at VONQ, as the VONQ CTO, where there's also an AI lab developing AI products. So, Bill, thanks for coming to the show. Perhaps you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us just a little bit about your background and how you arrived at the place you are now.
Cool, it's a fun story. Right, actually, it's not, but it's better to say that for a podcast than to lead otherwise. So I've been kind of involved in startups for a long time, either as a founder or an early team member. So started in the Bay Area. So did a number of kind of e-commerce focused startups, but also a video game company and cashback shopping, and got into HR tech in 2008. So started with a semantic search tech product. So it was a parsing product. So just kind of used to understand documents, and so useful in CV parsing, useful in building job aggregators. But we ended up using it for a recruitment product that turned into the social CV. So as you mentioned, we had a Twitter job search product. So we were one of the very first developers on the Twitter API. We had access to the fire hose. We used our semantic search tech to isolate tweets that seemed to be offers of employment. And then would also analyze individuals' Twitter profiles and what they were tweeting, and would build candidate profiles based upon the content they were tweeting, plus the structured data in their bios. So we built a kind of like a job matching product out of that. Twitter cut off access to the fire hose, so we decremented that, but we had the social CV product. I took that to Dice. Dice saw a real fit with their CV licensing business, and we kind of integrated the products. Went there, ran an R&D lab where we did that integration, kind of built some other fun products there. Left that business, went to a beach for a couple of years, returned to London, and got back into HR tech through a private equity group that was looking at a company called VONQ, which is a recruitment marketing platform. It uses AI just to put together recruitment campaigns and to deliver those campaigns to job boards. And had a strategic role, got excited about the business, took an operating role, and that's where I'm at.
So that brings you here now, which is something one of the things I've always respected about you, and you are one of the leading voices, certainly if you go to LinkedIn, around AI and what it means for recruiting and talent acquisition. But one of the things I admire about you is your ability to simplify some of the terminology within AI. It's something I hear from talent acquisition leaders all the time is, I'm embarrassed to ask, but I'm a bit confused, or I don't really understand some of the basic terms. So what I wanted to look at today is really simplifying the things that we're talking about in the market, what they are and why that's important for talent acquisition leaders, what it might mean. And I think a good place to start is MLMs, or massive language models, which is what we're building most things on. So what can you tell us about MLMs and what they really are in simple terms?
Cool. So you've got massive language models or large language models, which utilize something called transformer architecture. But I'll try to explain a little bit about how that works. So they take a data set. In the case of something like OpenAI, the data set is basically anything that's ever been put on the web. So every document that's ever been on the internet. But what they do is for each word, they try to they try to assign a numerical value to each of those words, and so it'll take an individual word, like a cat, and it'll say mammal, furry, cute, small. It'll have lots of different associative adjectives for it that assigns a number for it. It'll then look at that word in the context of the adjacent words. So sometimes people talk about attention, but basically it's kind of looking at words in context, and so it'll then assign additional values to that one word cat based on the context it's in. And so it'll look at it within the adjacent words. It'll look at the context within the sentence. It'll look at the word within the context of the document to really help you understand what it is and to have a number for it. More importantly, to have a number for it. So you basically have a way to convert all the words into numbers, and so you can perform calculations to understand those words.
Okay, so let's break that into something simple then. Let's take something like a CV or a resume for our American friends. How does that apply to understanding a CV?
Cool. So, like a fun example is the word Python. So when you're parsing CVs, typically what you're doing is looking for keywords. So what I was doing before with semantic search and what companies like TextKernel and Archili and Daxtra do very well is they have a list of kind of all of the skills. They have a list of all the job titles. They have a list of locations. They have a list of companies. They have a list of a lot of the associations between those. And so what they will do is they will look at a document like a CV and just try to extract all of those keywords. So that was kind of like the base approach to understanding what's in a CV, which is the aggregate of all the keywords that was in there. So they had specialized taxonomies for it and ontologies for it. So that was the work they were done. But what's fun with a large language model is that it takes that to a very different level. So if it sees a keyword like Python, but the CV is for a circus performer, it'll know that in this instant it's referring to the snake and not the programming language. So it has a much deeper understanding of those keywords. And it also pulls out more context. So if somebody says, I don't work with Python, in most previous parsing, they still might show up as having the skill Python, but with a large language model, because it's looking at the whole context, it's able to understand that this person doesn't have that skill. Even something like a skill level, it'll look at the language. So if somebody says like, I've got limited background with Python, but I've got 3 years in PHP, it understands what that means as well. So you can just get to a much deeper understanding of the document and a more accurate understanding of the document.
And why is that important then? What difference are you seeing now in tools today compared to maybe what we had, let's say, 5 years ago?
So I think one of the big opportunities I see when you have a better ability to interrogate the data is that is in the sourcing function. So you have these companies that have spent millions or even billions building up sets of talent pools. So they have a collection of millions of CVs. They've run them through traditional parsers. They've extracted data so they can search against it. But because they're missing lots of the data, or a lot of the data isn't appropriately categorized, recruiters end up not using those data sets. So they spend millions to build the data set, but they don't use it in recruitment because they get too many false positives. So when they run the search,
so tell the listeners what a false positive is. Give us a practical example of what we're talking about.
A false positive is so you build your Boolean query. So you build I want somebody has this, but not this, but has this, but not this. So you build the perfect search. You run it against your set of candidates in the talent pool. You then get a list. You have 100 people that fit that criteria. But often what happens is that, like the first 20, maybe on those applications, they stuff their CV full of keywords so the candidates seem relevant. And then you burn time trying to engage with those candidates, but they're not necessarily relevant. Um, you know, you know, or they're relevant, but they've applied that skill in a way that isn't relevant to the job. So what you can do but in that instance, false positive is really just it's the collection of candidates that superficially seem very relevant to the role. They seem worth investing the time to kind of reach out to them and communicate with them, but they're not. But with a large language model, you can have a better understanding of the job description and a more nuanced understanding of the CV. And between those two, you're able to build a short list of candidates that are more relevant than what you would find before. And we believe that's going to unlock a lot of value in in sourcing.
So unlocking value in sourcing, actually be able to match far more accurately. Does this mean you're returning less results of a higher quality, or what are you seeing in real life?
In real life, we're just seeing exactly that. So we're just seeing a short list, which is considerably more relevant than short lists you were able to build before, because the quality of the search tools are better, the depth of understanding of the candidates is better, the depth of understanding of the role is better. And so the net result is you then have a short list that's then worth investing some time. But then that gets to the generative capabilities of large language models, so that once you have the short list, you can then communicate with those candidates, and an AI can do that communication just to see, are they currently available? Do they have right to work? Do they live near the location? And so that's another capability of large language models in AI, which can do that initial, the kind of like the knockout part of the search, which is also a time-consuming part.
So the first stage of screening, really, historically, you would have done your search, and then you'll reach out to people, and then you'll contact them in some way, either email, in-mail, phone call, and pretty quickly you want to establish some qualification of, is this worth progressing to the next part, which typically would be the first interview or a technical test, for example.
Exactly. So, and this is where sourcing is different than, kind of matching off of candidates who've applied for a role. So when a candidate has applied for a role, there's a general understanding that they at least think they're a fit for it. They're open to new opportunity. They're likely looking for work. They could very likely be interested in this specific company, in this specific role. So that's where you don't need a real high quality assessment of the document because you have all those other signals. But when you're sourcing, you don't have all those extra signals, and it becomes very expensive to spend time on candidates that aren't likely to convert. And that's where AI can really deliver a lot of value.
So what sort of value are you seeing from that kind of first level outreach and screening?
I think we're just seeing that the value we're seeing is like the ability to just turn a talent pool into active, interested, qualified applicants. In having a system that does that at very low cost, as opposed to a manual process, which is frustrating, time-consuming, and expensive. So it's really just the ability to unlock that value. So a good example is some of the conversations. Even the CEO of Randstad was frustrated. They spend billions advertising, and about half of the applications they get are for candidates they already have in their system, but they just didn't have the tooling in place to find those candidates in the system before they advertise the role. So it's the ability, and again, this works cross purposes to what we're doing at VONQ, but they're finding, it creates the ability for them to fill roles before they advertise.
So to actually look into your own, something we've talked about many times is how do we look inside the ATS or the CRM and see who's actually there, and how do we qualify those people, and how do we make assumptions about unlimited data sets. I know one of the things I've heard you talking about previously is that in the past, the data, when you receive data in the form of a CV, it's accurate to the current day and doesn't update. Are we seeing something different now in terms of the way what data is?
No, I think just by having the data in context, to have a deeper understanding, again, not just doing this off of keywords, but it's the keywords in context.
Yeah.
You just have the ability, again, just to build your first pass shortlist is considerably more likely to have candidates that are a good fit for the role than they were previously.
So you're getting a good fit, and you can interrogate. So how are you seeing within organisations that you're looking at? Maybe you're working with them, maybe it's people that you know or talk to in the industry. How are you seeing the workflow changing for a hiring organisation as a result of AI?
So one, we're seeing the ability to identify candidates internally better than they could before. And then in the instances where they are not able to identify a candidate from an internal database, we find that when they advertise a role, these systems using AI just do a much better job of doing the screening and the assessment of live candidates. So the quality of the data that's captured, the ability to determine which of the candidates are a good fit for the role, even the ability to do a gap analysis between information they haven't presented and is required to have a system communicate with those candidates to gather that additional information just to prepare a dossier. So we see that when they advertise a role, that's often where the pain begins. So we help minimize at VONQ. We help minimize the pain of building a smart talent acquisition campaign to bring candidates, but we're now building tools to then shortlist, communicate, assess, screen, and even interview those candidates. So it again allows a company just to take 1,000 applications, get to 10 good ones, and then have a human in the process to then focus on those 10 just to make sure they convert and they're the right fit for a hiring manager.
So the other piece, there's another term that I've heard you use quite a lot when you've been speaking around AI that I think is useful for the audience to understand. What's an agent?
So an agent, we talk about like agentic architecture, but simply an agent is you can provide an instruction. So find me 10 candidates that are a good fit for this one particular role. Ask them these 3 different knockout questions. Do a gap analysis to see which of the skills or experience they might be missing. Ask them that. So you can just provide an instruction to an agent, the agent will then break that into tasks. It'll then perform those tasks and then report back once the tasks are completed. So it's an AI that has the ability to understand what it's being asked to do, to break it into tasks, complete the tasks, and report back.
And report back and generate an outcome, which is something I find really interesting, because we're really talking in the same way as I would have evolved or put together a talent acquisition team where people have individual jobs within the selection criteria, whether that's to deal with the outreach, the qualification, the phone screen, whatever it is. People had individual jobs. And I think when I looked at it in one enterprise organization, there was something like 77 tasks had to be completed in order for someone to be hired. And that could be anything from diary scheduling, booking rooms, sending confirmation email, getting email back, communicating with the hiring manager. So agents, we're saying, are filling in these gaps.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the architecture we put in place at VONQ, you have kind of a master or a controller agent that you can give a general high-level task to. And then we have specialized agents. So we'll have a sourcing agent that runs through the process that I described before, where the sourcing agent will look at the job description, it'll build a search query, it'll find relevant candidates, it'll do some communication with them, it'll then come up with, it'll then report back as to how many candidates it thinks it found. If it doesn't hit the target that's required for this one particular requisition, it'll then hand it over to an advertising agent. So the advertising agent will then look at the job description, will, based upon that, will come up with a media plan for advertising. It'll take the job description, will convert it into the appropriate ad units for the different job boards. It can then can execute the delivery of that campaign. And then you have an assessment agent that as each of the CVs come in. So the assessment agent is told just to stack rank all these candidates based on predetermined vectors. So an assessment agent will look at a job description. It'll figure out these are the 20 most important parts of this. And with those 20 different sets, this set of 20 different criteria, it'll evaluate all the candidates, provide a score. And then report back to the controller, just saying I've completed the assessment. The controller then will then send the task to an interview agent. So an interview agent again will read the job description. It'll read the candidate's application. It'll put together an interview plan for it, conduct the interview, build a transcript of the interview, score their interview, and then pass that back to the ATS. So we just have a collection of specialized agents that perform tasks that are assigned to it by the controlling agent.
Okay, so some of the fears I hear back from talent acquisition leaders is, one is around the diversity or bias in data. What precautions are taken to avoid kind of bias or risky practices?
Yeah, so a lot of AI systems that were built for assessment would look at successful candidates for that role. So you could just for a specific role, you could just go, here are 30 candidates that have that we've hired that have been successful in that role. And then there's kind of a black box that'll look at new applications, against what the model has interpreted as a good candidate. But the problem is you don't really know why or how it's scoring those candidates, and there could be biases into the system. So it could be all males, it could be only people from Philadelphia, it could be people who are only from a certain university. So you don't know what sort of bias is pre-built into the selection criteria. So what we've done is we do it solely based upon objective criteria that we determine, and we just look at that. So it doesn't look at names, it doesn't look at locations, it doesn't have this preset view of what a good candidate is. It just kind of says it needs to have. It could look at job titles, it could look at skills, it could look at education, it could look at certificates, and then it just kind of does an assessment on each of those from the information provided by the candidate against the job description, and then it provides a score. Then it also provides a recruiter the ability to know how that score was determined. So that kind of covers the transparency thing. So again, in a very transparent way, you could go, okay, we were looking at these 20 things. This is how this candidate scored against each of those 20 elements. And then this is the rationale for why we think they have a high or low mark on each of those 20 elements. So it provides transparency, and it's a far more objective process than than kind of a black box algo.
So when we talk about transparency, I'm hearing this word repeatedly. What does that mean? What does that look like within AI?
So one, it's a very important question. So a lot of the new legislation that's being considered is around this area of transparency. But it's allowing, if a candidate doesn't get a job, it's providing a system that you can explain back to the candidate why they may or may not have been a right fit for a job. So it's the ability to know what criteria was considered, what criteria did the candidate present, how did the system think the material the candidate present, how did it interpret that material. So everything is clear. So you can kind of reverse engineer why some candidates the system recommends and why other candidates might not have been put forward. So there's just this level, a granular level of everything that went into the scoring of this candidate or this application.
And while I appreciate it's speculation at the moment, none of us know absolutely. I've been speaking with Keith Sonderling recently from the US, who's who's the leader in charge of the US government in terms of discrimination, diversity. What do you think this means in real terms for hiring organizations, in terms of how you're introducing a system, you're bringing something which is actually going to make things better?
The way we think about it is that every person has biases, whether they whether they know they have them or not, and they bring those to this process. And that bias could be, there are a lot of different ways so if you have a person involved in the process, it's impossible for them to thoroughly go through 1,000 different CVs. So they have certain things that they're on the look for. So one, you just have the area of what's being looked at. And so a person has to have a more narrow focus of what they look at than an AI system, because it's just very time consuming for a person to do that. Whereas an AI, it takes them very little time to have a holistic view of each application. So that's part of it.
I think that's really that's quite important. I know as a recruiter, I was really looking for a system that said, actually, I only look at these 5 things. That's how I screen. So just answer these 5 questions.
Yeah. So there's the Yeah, so there's the ability to have a broader view of every application, more thorough review of every application, and then there might be uh, there might be terms somebody uses or synonyms that somebody uses that a system doesn't recognize, a typical system doesn't recognize, but an LLM
So if it
does.
doesn't recognise it, you fail, or you score zero effectively in the ranking.
No, exactly. So a lot of great candidates, get missed because the recruiter has a narrower view of what they're looking at in each of the applications. When in fact they're very good applicants. But then people also could be, it could be a name, it could be a university, it could be a hobby. There could be other uh, there could be other indicators that are proxies for something. Uh, that could be race or it could be gender. Like there could be other uh, parts of a CV that could fall into a recruiter's bias, whether they recognize it or not. And so our system, we tried to build it in a way that it doesn't look at those types of indicators. Yeah, that it has another set of indicators that it looks at.
Got it. So let's say I'm a candidate. I'm out there. I know what the candidate experience has been like historically. Why is this better for me as a candidate?
Yeah, so one, we think the candidate journey can be vastly improved. So we could talk about new candidate journeys using AI, but I think it's really just you can feel like uh, uh, you have a better chance. So if you don't meet the conventional mold of what a good candidate looks like for that role, um, um, or you don't meet the conventional view that a recruiter might have of what's a specific recruiter might have for that role, it allows you to have a chance. It allows you to have a chance, and it'll. So that's an important thing. A gap analysis is really difficult for people to do. So reviewing a job description, reviewing a candidate, see what they're missing. So there are a lot of people that do have relevant experience or skills or qualities that don't come through initially, on the documents they provide. And these systems can do that gap analysis and request more information to the candidate. So that's another thing that recruiters really don't have the time to do the gap analysis, and then gather more information to help put a candidate forward.
And is that really why we've seen the whole process of rinse and repeat, i.e. every time you get a new role, pretty much start the search again, put some adverts out and see what comes back, rather than saying there's a million CVs in my ATS?
That's a big part of it. Yeah, it's definitely a big part of it.
And so this is really looking at it and saying, okay, what have we got? But you're also making certain assumptions that says it's worth asking a question of this candidate because their experience looks like somebody else's who's done this job. They just haven't written it down anywhere. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah. So there are a lot of near fits, and in the near fit. You have a first pass near fit. So a candidate that seems like they could be, but you're missing some information, but it's probably not worth digging into. As a person, it's probably not investing the time. But for an AI, it requires very very little effort to do that. So I think that's part of it. Oftentimes you have like the same. You have some candidates that apply for 500 roles, and they get 400 interviews, but they're only going to accept one, which means but they apply for multiple jobs. This is a bit. I'm trying to think of an efficient way to describe this, but I think it's clear. So you have some candidates that basically they get all the interviews, but they only want one job. But it means that every time they get an interview, it's a slot that somebody else could have had. So you just have, again, you have this class of candidates that don't meet the general accepted uh, uh, criteria for hireability, but they are, they or they can be a fit.
They are a fit. It's just not immediately obvious from the data that's available, which means you need to go and interrogate a bit more, which I think any recruiter would say, if there's 20 people who loosely fit, I'd love to have the time to call them all and have a conversation, and I'm pretty sure I would unearth somebody in there. That's really what we're talking about.
I think maybe just think of it. I mean, you can just have a bigger short list. You can have a bigger short list.
And every single entry on that short list can be qualified. It's what I'm hearing is the difference is, every single entry on that short list who meets the criteria or looks like they could meet the right criteria can be interrogated. You can ask further questions. You can go further. You can go beyond the CV, which was received, which I think is super exciting. Now, something I read, I think this weekend in Hung Lee's Recruiting Brain Food, excellent. For anyone, I recommend anyone listening is subscribe to Recruiting Brain.
It is great.
But the question that was asked, and it was a candidate, I think a tech candidate, so probably someone in high demand, but they used AI to apply for jobs, and they got 50 interviews back. How much are you seeing in terms of AI being developed on the candidate side, and what challenge might that present to us?
So right now we're seeing that there are lots of these tools. It's very easy to build kind of a bad tool for that. It feels like it's a potential problem, and our point of view is, but it's not really a problem in practice yet. But our feeling is that these tools will get very good. I think it makes too much sense for a candidate to use one of these tools as opposed to the real painful process of going through all the applications. So our point of view is that on the candidate side, the use of AI will be most of the applications as opposed to a small percent. But because it removes so much friction in applying, we'll have far too many candidates that seem like a good fit. And so you're going to need
because each application is being written individually. So
that's exactly right. So I mean, some of the better AI application tools do a very good job of, you give it a specific job, you give it your CV, and it'll rework your CV so it seems to be a very good fit for that role. So traditional screening methods fall apart if all of a sudden you get 300 candidates that have all the keywords on their CV. So you need to have some other way to perform that assessment.
So how is the screening or the screening aspect of AI, how is it dealing with that to help resolve that problem? Because on paper you have 300 candidates who fit the job, right?
You do. This is where I just think where it's you can burn tokens. So tokens are how you get charged to use an LLM. So you can burn tokens just to communicate with that new shortlist of 300, just to kind of dig a little deeper on each of them, and also just to engage specific interest in a specific role, because some of the AI apply things are not so discriminatory about what they apply for. The candidates might not even remember what they applied for, or for many specific roles they have very little interest.
The AI is doing the application, they don't even know.
No, exactly. So they don't know, or if they get an interview and then they go and look up the company, they might know this isn't something I'm interested in. It's just not a company I want to work for, or it's not a commute I want to have, or the role superficially seems to be a good fit, but it's not something I'm interested in.
Yeah.
So just
it's back to the keywords match. The keywords match.
Yeah, so again, so the keyword match. So again, the situation, you have 1,000 applications. All of the applications are done with AI, so you end up with 300 that seem to be an excellent fit. But you're only going to hire one. You don't want to spend time with all 300 of those. And so having an AI then communicate with the candidates and just go, like this role is in Marseille. This is a company. Uh, this is what anyway, just communicate just to make sure this person really is interested in this specific role and is a good fit, and then even dig in a little deeper on their skills and experience.
I think the other side that's going through my mind, now I'm seeing these tools, and I'm sure we're going to be seeing a lot more posts over the next 2 or 3 months on LinkedIn and other channels about candidates securing, in the similar case, 50 interviews. I think we're going to see exactly the same thing. So exactly the same as we're seeing qualification on the part of the AI in the selection, saying, right, let's ask a few more questions or let's get a bit more detail. I think we're going to start seeing that in the applicant AI. At the moment, they've been built and designed from the point of view of get some interviews, cover a wide market, find in 1 million jobs to 20 jobs or 50 jobs that might be okay for me based on some criteria. I think we're going to see much greater targeting and qualification, which means ultimately the learning is going to make that much better. For example, this candidate who got 50.
Yeah, so in a way, are you still there, Bill?
If they reject 30 of those interviews, the algorithm is then going to learn.
Bill, are you there?
So talk to me a little bit about that, not just from about how algorithms learn and correct based
Bill,
on
are you there?
Based on outcomes.
Yeah, so the line dropped for a little bit, so I missed the rest of the question. But I think in response to that, so a lot of companies have created really terrible candidate journeys. And it's not because they're not smart people who aren't capable of having an easier application flow for a candidate, but they know that by creating friction in the process, candidates will sort of self-select out of the process, so it can do some of that winnowing through a bad process. But because they've built such a terrible candidate journey, the incentive is higher for candidates to use an AI tool to circumvent that and do the applications. Because nobody wants to have to upload their CV 50 times and then literally retype all the information from the CV into specific forms, and then answer a bunch of questions, a bunch of boilerplate questions. So I think I blame companies a little bit for creating this terrible candidate journey. I think it makes sense that candidates would use AI to get around it. And so I think companies are going to have to find other ways to create friction or to do the narrowing. That's not as cumbersome upon the candidates.
That's super interesting, and I think that'll get right. We're coming towards the end of the podcast. It's been fantastic speaking to you, Bill. What thoughts would you want to leave people with about AI? Anyone considering now thinking, right, I'm going to start this journey. What thoughts would you want to leave them with?
On the recruitment side, so our general feeling is that almost all of the kind of administrative tasks are probably can be performed better, cheaper, faster using AI tools. Even if the tools don't seem good enough today, 6 months from now, they certainly will be good enough. So our hunch is that the direction of travel is certainly towards having AI managing most of the administrative roles at the tasks at the top of the funnel. But I think the opportunity then is for companies to invest more time with fewer candidates, and I think that's going to be a real opportunity for them.
That's fantastic. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you and follow your work, I recommend they follow you on LinkedIn. Where can they find you, Bill?
LinkedIn. I forget if I'm William Fisher or Bill Fisher, but either one will resolve to me. VONQ.com, VONQ.com. And then for any of your listeners, I'm just Bill at VONQ. Bill at VONQ.com.
Bill at VONQ, so easy to email. Bill Fisher, I think you are Bill, not William on LinkedIn and William on Facebook, if I remember rightly. But FISCHER.
That's correct. But Bill at VONQ is probably the easiest.
Bill at VONQ is the easiest one. Bang you an email. So, Bill, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate you jumping in and having a conversation, and I look forward to seeing you in the near future.
I look forward to it as well.
Thanks, Bill.
Cheers.